Welcome back to Garden Party, everybody. As you know, we're a virtual series from the Southern California News Group here to give you tips, tricks, and insights you won't get anywhere else on getting the most joy and productivity out of your gardening experience, and maybe also help you find a community of like-minded green thumbs, or in my case, a wannabe green thumb. I'm Sam Dunn. I'm the senior editor for premium content here at the Southern California News Group. And I need to say thank you to all of our Reader Reward subscribers, as I always do, and to all of you for supporting our virtual programs. And hey, by the way, if you are a Read Reward subscriber attending, you're automatically entered to win a $100 gift certificate from Home Depot. And that should come in handy with all the news we have coming up for you. And if you're not a subscriber, well, why aren't you a subscriber? Go to scng.com/subscribe, find your local paper, and please join the family. I need to remind you of a few things before we get started. You're going to be muted, but if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature on the Zoom toolbar on your screen. And certainly if you want to make comments, use the chat feature found there as well. And we're going to respond to your questions as much as possible. This session will be videotaped, and there's going to be a link sent to you so you can see what we've covered and maybe share this video and maybe revisit some of your favorite moments. Keep in mind, this is a freewheeling conversation, but you're going to have slides to refer to, and the information will be emailed to you after the show. It's also posted on scng.com/virtual events afterwards, where you can find all of our past virtual shows and you can see what's coming up. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our resident gardening rock star, Joshua Siskind. He is the gardening columnist at the LA Daily News since 1993. Joshua holds a master's degree in horticulture from UC Davis, and he's also been a landscaping and gardening practices instructor for LA Unified School District and UCLA Extension, and he's owned his own landscaping company. The guy knows what he's doing. He's also written a book too. It's called Green Plants Under Smoggy Skies, a guide for the Los Angeles gardener. And he's also been a licensed psychotherapist. So as I like to say, as you know, he's good at getting to the root of our gardening issues. Anyway, hello, Joshua. How are you?
Great, Samantha. Great to be here.
It's wonderful. Well, listen, with our ongoing severe drought, so many of us are rethinking our water usage and reimagining our landscaping and our gardening. And so I can't think of anything better than today's topic of succulents and cacti. So let's just do it. Where do we begin?
So yeah, well, the place to begin is, as you say, these plants are suitable for gardens where little to zero water is available. I have many succulents and cacti in my own garden, and honestly, I don't water them. If I want them to maybe flower a little bit more, I can water them once a month. But even if I don't water them at all, they're going to live through the entire summer. So that's what you want to keep in mind.
Okay.
And we call these plants xerophytes. Why? Because they live in dry climates and they have structures and physiology that reduce water loss. And just about every family of plants has succulents within its species. Oh, and we have pictures here of an orchid, for example, which is a succulent, okay? In fact, many orchids are quite drought tolerant, but this one is explicitly succulent. And on the right, we have a picture of what's called blue chalk sticks, a member of the daisy family.
Oh, wow.
So there's a very broad range of succulent plants throughout the botanical kingdom. And it makes it a lot more interesting to see the diversity that you find.
I love it. Yeah, because we tend to see the same plants over and over again in gardening choices.
Right. Right. Yeah. People. I mean, you have seen the blue chalk sticks that become very popular. Yeah. And one point that needs to be made is it's very easy to propagate cacti and succulents. They're all can easily be propagated. If it's a cactus, you take off a pad, or you could cut off a piece of a stem. You let it callus, which means it hardens off on the cut area for about a week, and then you can plant it. So this makes it very easy and inexpensive, actually, to have a garden of these plants, because you can plant them sparsely in your garden, and then as they grow, you can propagate them. And there are also a lot that create what are called pups or offsets. So you simply detach those, and then you plant them all around your garden. So it's a very easy way to fill up space in your yard with a very little amount of water.
And a beautiful way, which we'll get to. So
Yeah.
let's move on to see some of the other conditions for growing.
So we generally say half day to full day sun. And many aloes will actually grow in light shade. Okay. And once established, as we said before, they never need more than watering once a week, and many can go much further than that, longer than that, if not the entire summer.
I have a question on that watering, if I may. I've always been told you need to water pretty extensively at the beginning of planting something so you can establish the system. Is that also true?
That's a point worth making. I mean, especially if you plant this time of year. Although it's wiser to plant cactus. Succulents are not so critical in this respect, but cactus should rather be planted in warm weather than cold weather, because there's nothing worse for a cactus than a cold, wet soil. And if you plant in the winter, you might think you have to water, and that will cause rot of the roots of the cactus plant.
Great point.
Planting now for cactus is really a great idea. You want to water a little to get going, but after that, it's going to be fine.
Okay.
And another point I want to mention is they do not require fertilization. Like I said, if you throw a little phosphorus on them in the spring, then they're going to get a few more flowers than otherwise. And as for container mix, you want to use a mix that's very well draining. And cacti are going to be more particular in this regard, because they're going to have a soil that drains more quickly, and that's reflected in these mixes, which you can come back and look at your leisure.
Great. Coping with a dry climate. Okay.
So so what happens? What is the physiology that's involved? So it's the leaves, the pads, or the stems. They have a watertight cuticle or bark. But there's something about the relationship between the surface area and the volume. If you take a maple leaf, for example, everybody knows what a maple leaf looks like, right? It's on the Canadian flag. Imagine for a moment then you have that same surface area, but with about an inch of interior area, water holding area in between. Well, obviously that leaf is not going to need as much water to remain hydrated as it would be if it's just the leaf without the volume in between. So that's a very important principle.
So that's why we see these big fat stems.
Fat leaf, because all that area inside is holding water.
Right.
And a poor little leaf, a flat leaf with very little volume is really not holding much water at all. And that's why it needs to be drawing up water on a daily basis.
Right.
The other thing worth mentioning is that the leaf pores there are fewer leaf pores in a cactus than there are on a regular leaf. Okay, leaf pores are the openings that water escapes through. The other thing is that these leaf pores, called stomata, are sunken in drought-tolerant plants, so that the water that does come up stays along the surface and is not blown away by the wind. See, with most plants, what happens is not just the sun dries them out, but any kind of breeze that comes along blows away this surface layer of water above the leaf pores. That doesn't happen with the xerophytes. And the one xerophytes that do have leaves lose the leaves in the summer, such as the acacia, we'll talk about.
Summer deciduous. What a great word. Summer deciduous. Anyway, sorry, you were going.
No, it's great. So I was just going to say that there's something about the physiology of cacti and many succulents that also aids in holding water. Most plants do their photosynthesis during the day, okay? But in order to do that photosynthesis, the leaf pores have to be open, okay? So that as the sun strikes the leaves, it opens up these leaf pores and water is coming out, right? With succulent plants, this happens, and the leaf pores do not open during the day. They open during the night, okay? And during the night is when they draw in the carbon dioxide that they use to make sugar, which is the product of photosynthesis. So that's a very important point in the physiology. And and then there's, of course, the sap is mucilaginous in cacti and succulents. It means it holds water very strong. And last but not least, and this is a very important point, actually, A lot of succulents have what's called a hydrophobic layer of epicuticular wax or farina. It looks like a little white powder. I
Yeah.
can show you here. You see this? And now the problem is you can easily rub, I don't know if you can see, but yeah. This white powder can be rubbed off. Now you don't want to do that because you can easily do that, but if you this white powder prevents the plants from drying out. It helps keep the water in, and it also deters insect pests and diseases. So you never want to rub. I mean, you can't help doing that when you pick up the plant. You're going to rub the leaves a little. But you want to try to avoid doing that because that is the protective layer that allows many, many succulents to survive in a drought.
That's also just on the level of aesthetics. That's very interesting too, because that's part of what gives these succulents their soft.
Right. They do have the softness to them. Many, many different species do have that softness. That's correct.
Interesting. Okay.
So we're trying to, okay, so now when we talk about cacti, we also often talk about euphorbia because euphorbias can be very spiny as well, which we'll show you when we get into the slide.
Okay.
What is the function of the thorns? The function of the thorns is to restrict the airflow. As we said, there's always a layer of water vapor that exits through the leaf pores, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what kept by the thorns, the thorns keep that layer of moisture intact, prevents again the wind from blowing it away. So that's really the function. I mean, obviously it keeps predators away, right? That's one of the functions of thorns. It keeps predators away, but it also has that function. And lastly, the dewdrops that adhere to the thorns trickle down into the cactus and into the earth.
So it's all about protecting water, essentially.
Right. Absolutely. They're essential for water as well. Yeah. And then last but not least, you'll see in a lot of cacti and euphorbias, they have channels on their stems.
Yes.
Right? And those channels, again, when it finally does rain, every bit of that rain is going to be channeled down directly to the roots, and that's the function of the channels that you see on the cacti.
Interesting. We have quite an extensive question popping up right now. If we want to pause for just a minute, it's Marcia Milchiker. Forgive me, Marcia, if I'm saying that incorrectly. She says, I was told to put stones in the bottom of the pot and then use cactus and succulent potting soil to put a succulent in a container. Should she do this? She says she has a pot without
This is one of the biggest myths in horticulture, and that is by putting rocks or broken pieces of clay pots in the bottom. No. It doesn't do any good because at the end of the day, it's just sitting there. If the soil is not good, okay.
Right.
I don't care what you put in the bottom of the pot, it's not going to make a difference. Okay. It's not going to make a difference. The main thing is the soil. If you put a cactus soil mix into the pot, and we gave you the ingredients of that earlier, you're going to get the drainage that you need.
Okay. She says she also, there's more to this question. She has a pot without a hole in the bottom. Should she do this? Also, she has a large succulent, which is starting to look ugly and leggy after about 5 years on her porch. How do you revitalize this?
Well, if it's ugly and leggy, it means it's not getting enough light. Okay. Leggy means, stretching for the sun. And the only way to remedy that is to give it more light.
Great.
And as for having it's always perilous to have a container without a hole. Now, what you can do, because some people have these beautiful ceramic pots, if they want to put the plant in the pot, that's fine. So what you do though, when you water it, you take it out of the pot, right? And you make sure that it's in a container that does have holes, and then you take it out and you water it on the side. And then after it's good and saturated and all the water is drained through, then you can put it back in the pot. Perfect.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Marcia. I hope that answers your question. Now let's move. I love this slide about cacti. I didn't know that.
Okay. So what it does here, the redder the area, the more dense it is in cactus species. So you can see from here, right? Again, all the cactus, it's funny, the word was invented by someone in Greece. It refers to a spiny plant. It obviously wasn't a cactus because there are no cactus that live in that are native to Greece. The only cacti in the world are native to the Western Hemisphere, except for one species which they're not quite sure of, but that species doesn't grow in Greece. So, but anyway, so you can see here that Mexico and Central America, or Northern Central America, are really the hot spots when it comes to cacti. But cacti.
Let me just say, part of what I love about this is that cacti and succulents are so ubiquitous in our Southern California environment. We take them for granted, essentially, or at least I do. And it's so wonderful to see how really special and unique they are to our area. Anyway, please go ahead.
This is only this part of the world. But you can see they go all the way up into Canada, right? And they go all the way down to the tip of South America. So you find them all over North and South America. And then, like I said, there's one species that could be native to Africa, but they're not sure because they think maybe explorers took it there or migratory birds.
And that's West Africa? That's West Africa that it's native to?
No, East Africa. East Africa, Madagascar. Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway, the flowers of many cacti are pollinated at night by bats and moths. And the reason for that is pretty obvious. If these flowers were to bloom during the day, they might die before they could get pollinated, right? Because the conditions are just too severe. It's very, very hot, and the flowers could wilt. Now, not all cacti are like that. There are some cacti that bloom during the day, but there are quite a few that bloom at night, and a lot of them have very sweet fruit, especially what we call the prickly pear cactus.
Great. Okay.
So here we have columnar cacti.
Uh-huh.
And again, as we said, they're the ones with the ridges that allow for the. But now here on the left, we have the old man cactus and the fruit. These, the white hair on the cactus prevents the water loss because it's protecting that thin layer of moisture that is transpired through the leaf pores. And then on the right, you have the dragon fruit, which is. Now, I wouldn't call it especially columnar, but it's upright. It can grow to 30 feet tall. And then on the far right, we have the apple cactus. And the fruit of all of these is quite edible, and it's a good selling point. And then in the second from the left on the bottom, we have what's called the blue saguaro, which we're going to show you a picture of in a minute. It's the tallest cactus. It gets to over 65 feet tall.
And it's unique to Arizona, correct?
No, the saguaro. Now that's the blue saguaro. This saguaro, the original saguaro, if you want to call it that, is unique to Arizona. The only place it grows in the United States is Arizona, except for the very edge of southeastern California. You have a few, but yeah, that's what makes it special. It's the Arizona, national plant and everything like that.
Right. I think I told you every time I'm being from New Mexico, every time I see a movie that's supposed to be shot in New Mexico and they have saguaro cactus, I say, darn it, that's not right. Anyway, onward.
Exactly. So anyway, again, here's a picture of a blue saguaro upper left. I think it's a great picture because somebody's just sitting under it, and it's a massive plant. And you can grow this in California. I highly recommend the California Cactus Center in Pasadena. They have those for sale there. And I don't know if yours ever get that big, but
everybody will. What he just mentioned, we'll have resources at the end, so don't worry.
At the end, we're going to show you all the nurseries in
Southern California. We're starting to have a pile up of questions. Would you like to take a break and take a few questions? Sure. Kathy Weiner says she missed the perfect potting soil recommendation. What was that again?
Okay, so it's basically three. Well, I would recommend you come back and look at the video because.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? It's like it's just information there. It's right there.
Okay,
so
perfect.
At the end of the presentation, you can go back in and take a look at it.
We've talked a lot about water and succulents and cacti already, and Jeannie and Jim Kelly want to know what the best way to water succulents and cacti is.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because especially these plants that have the farina, right? That epicuticular wax that you don't want to touch. Yeah. It's always advisable to water from the bottom.
From the bottom. Okay,
Yeah.
so not
Drip
spraying.
irrigation, or if
Yeah.
you just want to, have soaker hose, or if you just want to have a hose attachment, right, and make sure to stay around the edges. It's never a good idea to get a cactus wet or succulent.
Interesting.
You really
Interesting.
do
Well,
want to.
speaking of that, we have a related question from Yolanda Lixon. She says she has a cactus in a pot that does not have a hole in the bottom and has received too much rainwater at one point. It's now yellowing badly, but it still blooms, although not a lot like before. It's a single 4-foot cactus. How can she rescue it?
Okay, well, I would put it in cactus mix. And by the way, you don't have to make your own. If you go into any nursery, they're going to have bags of cactus mix.
Okay.
And so, I would change the soil, because if it was saturated, that soil could still be wet, because
Okay.
cactus don't take up very much water.
Okay. Perfect. Great. Let's get
Okay.
to our beloved prickly pear. We see them all
Yeah,
over.
prickly pear cactus. Actually, the one on the second to the right is not considered prickly pear. The golden barrel cactus. That's a probably the most popular landscaping cactus. It has a presence of its own. But everything else you see here is a prickly pear. They all produce edible fruit. On the upper left, I draw your attention to the Opuntia littoralis, only because it's a California native prickly pear. And you can see it if you go down the 101 freeway when you get to Cheeseboro Road exit. There's a massive, what should I say, naturalization of this cactus all along the hillside as you drive down the freeway.
Yeah,
But
we have one here in Orange. It's just beautiful especially when they
yeah,
bloom.
when they grow out like that. But the one I really want to bring your attention to is the prickly pear cactus, which you see second from the left on the bottom. But on the upper right, you see, well, actually, on the bottom, second from the right, is what in Mexico, they grow this cactus for a single purpose, and that is to create nesting grounds for a scale insect, which we would normally consider to be a pest. But this scale insect, in sucking the sap out of the cactus, produces a red dye, okay? And you can see the red dye in the upper right-hand slide. And that red dye is originally, red dye used in Europe and the Middle East came from a scale that sucked the sap from an oak tree, okay? And then when the explorers arrived in Mexico, and they saw these cacti, and they saw that the red substance coming from the scale insect sucking on the plant, that became the red dye that was used in the world for several hundred years. Actually, it was more abundantly produced than the red dye from the scale insect on the oak tree until the invention of synthetic dyes, which is pretty recent
to me. And you start to appreciate the use of red in Mexican folk art and
right. That's where it comes from. Yeah,
that's where it comes from. Fascinating. Yeah. Okay.
So here we have tree-dwelling cacti. There's probably 4 major types. I mean, there are different ones, but first of all, you have the holiday cactus, and there are slight differences in the leaves, and the Thanksgiving, the Christmas, and the Easter cactus, right? Those are all tree dwellers. Then you have epiphyllum cactus, which are huge flowers on very ordinary leaves. The leaves are nothing special, but the flowers are unbelievable. And then you have something called fishbone cactus. And last but not least, the mistletoe cactus on the lower right, which I don't know if you're familiar with mistletoe, but it does vaguely resemble it.
Yes.
So these plants they don't want to be in the full sun, because they live in trees, right? So they want half-day sun, and they're pretty easy to grow. As long as you just sort of leave them alone.
I've told you my story of my mother's beautiful Christmas cactus that she had for decades, and as soon as she passed on, I inherited it, and I summarily killed it. And speaking of which, Janice Jimenez says she has a Christmas cactus that's turned purple, which she believes indicates stress. How can she save her poor Christmas cactus?
Yeah, well, first of all, make sure it's in partial sun, not full sun. I would give it a slow release fertilizer this time of the year.
Yeah.
Okay. And, water it only if it's, if the soil is really bone dry. That would be my suggestion.
Okay. Well, good luck, Janice. I hope you don't kill yours. I certainly killed mine. Okay, moving on. We've got a couple more, but one is on agave and one is on saguaro. So
Right. So,
let's wait just a minute.
yeah, so this is a crested cactus, which is a result of a mutation in the apical merostem is the most vertical growing point of any plant. It's called the apical merostem. And when those cells mutate in a certain way, you end up with what's called a crested cactus. Yeah, it looks like looks like some sort of a brain.
So, yeah, it looks like a brain. Are these you can grow these? These aren't just mutations that haphazard.
Well, yeah. I mean, here's the thing: if you want to propagate this, you'll have your own, like the blue one in the middle, right? The crested blue. Okay, so if you cut off a piece of that, right?
Yeah.
Let it sit for a week until it forms the callus on the end that you cut. Then you can plant it, and you'll have one of your own.
It looks like coral too. It almost looks like something under the sea. It's fascinating.
A work of art. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So here, I gotta, the bottom right, I have to draw your attention to this because this is what you call a plant that's doomed to die. Okay. The moon cactus. The reason, let me explain what's going on here. There was a Japanese, very enterprising Japanese nurseryman about 80 years ago who saw these cacti growing in South America that had these different colors, okay? Actually, they didn't have that many different colors, and those, I think it was all purple or red, but he saw potential here. So he brought them back to Japan, and he raised thousands of seedlings, okay? And from those thousands of seedlings, there were a couple that had color that were unusual. Now, again, we're just talking about the top. This is a grafted cactus. So he developed plants that were either entirely pink or entirely red or entirely yellow or entirely orange. The problem with that is that they didn't have anything green in them, and a plant that cannot make chlorophyll, which is the green pigment, is doomed to death, okay? So he thought, he had this idea where he would graft these onto another cactus that was green and would had chlorophyll pigment that makes photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is what gives plants their sugar, which is their source of energy.
Right.
Well, so it's interesting. He actually grafted these onto Hylocereus, which is the dragon fruit, which it doesn't end up forming a dragon fruit. But here's the problem. Here's why this plant was doomed to die. And they seldom live for more than 2 or 3 years. The green part underneath grows very quickly.
Right.
The red or the pink or the yellow grows very, very slowly. So what happens is you get this enormous growth on the bottom and nothing's going on the top, and it's incompatible. And there's another issue, and that is the cactus on the top prefers to be in the shade, whereas the grafted green part on the bottom prefers to be in the sun. So you have 2 issues of incompatibility here, right? One is the faster growth rate of the green part, and then the second is that the green part needs more sun. So you put it's an incompatible situation, but these plants are everywhere.
I would just say, my husband, I think I told you, my husband planted them in our planter out front, and I'm like, now I know they're going to die. Listen.
Now, if you go online, there's one way to salvage it, and that is if you cut off the top and you graft it onto another kind of cactus that grows more slowly. Okay, and is also more able to live in a little bit of shade. So you can salvage the situation, but you'll have to be kind of do it yourself.
Well, as fascinating as this is, we've got some questions rolling in, and one is on. Speaking of growth, one is on saguaro growth. Sue Anderson wants to know what the rate of growth for a saguaro is if you should try to propagate one.
Right, if you should try to grow it. Well, I think a rate of growth of saguaro is probably at 1 inch or 2 a year. It doesn't grow very fast.
It's not going to grow very fast.
No.
I believe
I've never heard of one growing in Southern California. I mean, I bring it in because when people think of cactus, they think of saguaro, but it's really, if you can grow it, all power to you. But
not the first on your list to try for the
right.
Great. I know we've got some more discussion on agaves coming up, and we have a question on that. So let's go ahead and move ahead.
Okay, so here's Kalanchoe. So this comes from Chinese words, which is Kulan Shao. Kulan Shao in Chinese means that which falls will grow.
Oh,
Now, why does it call that which falls will grow? It's because
why?
of the species on the upper right. I don't know if you noticed, but what you see, the pink there, are tiny little plantlets that grow on the mother plant. And when those fall, they all take root. They all have little tiny roots on them. And when they fall, they grow into new plants. So if you have this plant, they call it mother of thousands, you can have a whole nursery full of them in a very short time.
Well, they're very
Anyway,
pretty.
yeah, they're very pretty plants. They're very pretty plants. I have one behind me.
That color, the red, the splash of red there is a,
Yeah, you can see that. And it's the same. And the newer ones have rose-shaped flowers. The older Kalanchoe were just sort of an ordinary flower, but the newer ones look just like mini roses, so they're very, very attractive.
interesting.
And the plant on the right, yeah. Okay, let's go.
Yeah, let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and move forward. We've got lots of questions rolling in.
I see. So anyway, so here are euphorbias. These are, of course, there are many, many more euphorbias I could have brought. But the most famous one is the one on the bottom right, which is called crown of thorns. This one shows you flowers. They're not really flowers, they're actually bracts. The flower is a tiny little yellow thing. It's actually reminiscent of the poinsettia, which is also a euphorbia, right?
Really?
When you look at a euphorbia, you don't look at the flowers. You look at what are called bracts, which are modified leaves, right? They come in red, pink, whatever you want. The flower is a little something in the middle called a cyathium, okay, which you barely can see. But the crown of thorns has those bracts 365 days a year. And that's probably, the most unusual succulent in that regard.
That is
But the silver spurge on the bottom is a fantastic plant. I have it growing in my yard. It self-sows. It will take over. And then,
this
of course,
on fire I'm seeing everywhere. In
the sticks on fire is ubiquitous. You see it everywhere. And the sap, keep your children away from it because the sap is not healthy. It's a very toxic sap, as a matter of fact.
Interesting.
Yeah, you want to keep that in mind. It doesn't kill you.
That's not true for all euphorbias. That's just sticks on fire.
Yeah, no, all euphorbias are united by that. Even the, in the poinsettia, if you cut a stem, you'll see this white latex sap coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't want to make contact with your fingers.
Okay. Great. We've got a lot of questions. Oh, here's agave. And now I'll let you talk for a little bit and then we have an agave question.
Okay, so of course, the most famous is the bottom right, I guess, the tequila agave, which you can grow. And then in the middle, second from the right, you have what are called the agave cores, which you can kind of see in the plant that's growing on the bottom right. That's what's used for making agave. And by the way, they say there's a worm in the bottom. Or
yeah.
That's not a good. What it is, it's the larval stage of a beetle that's actually very damaging to agave plants. It injects a bacteria into the agave, which softens the tissue,
Yes.
and then the beetle goes in there and has a field day, and eventually the plant collapses. So
Well,
if you
yeah.
they put the
Well, speaking of which,
but it doesn't do the plant any good.
that is the question Gregory Miller has for you. He's been waiting for a while. He says he has several agaves in the yard. He says, I hardly water them and have some weevils that eat out the bottom core.
Yeah,
is there anything that can prevent this?
Okay, well, the classic non-invasive ones that you want to do, I mean, you'd have to apply frequently either neem oil or what's called spinosad. Okay, those are the two organic preparations. Now, if you want to do something inorganic, then you have to get the 3-in-1 Pear product. 3-in-1 is an all-purpose pesticide. You don't spray it. It's just granules. You put it around the plant. You water it in, and it's effective against insects and fungus and bacteria. It covers the spectrum.
But it might have other complications in terms of environmental impact.
Well, as in a granular product, it won't have the same impact because it's not being sprayed and people are breathing it in. But I mean, you have a point if you want to be
Mhm.
thoroughly consistent about that.
Gregory has another question about the agave, and I know you're going to address this. This is a good segue. He says that I know that after the agave send up the tree-like shoot, the agave will die. Can you explain
Right.
the process?
Okay, so this is called monocarpia. A plant that's a monocarp, actually carp means fruit. It means one fruit. But in this case, it means a plant that flowers once and then it dies.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And you say, why does that happen? It happens because that's the way, the plant was created. It doesn't have the capacity to survive beyond it. It's like a swan song. However, by that time, nearly all agaves have propagated themselves either by pups or offsets that are created around the base, or something called bulbils. Bulbils are entire plants that appear on the flower stalk. So for instance, if you're looking at the octopus agave on the bottom second from the left, it will put up a flower stalk before it dies that will have dozens of little baby octopus agaves with roots. So all you have to do is detach them and put them in the ground. So they do, and of course they do have seeds as well, but most of them are going to have live plants around the base or in their flower stalks.
Speaking of which, this circles back a little bit to the barrel cactus. Jeannie and Jim Kelly want to know, can they leave the pups on their barrel cactus?
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. Nothing wrong. No, leave it on. Yeah, the more the merrier.
Great, perfect. Well, we've got a couple more, but let's move on to aloe because this is a big topic of conversation.
Yeah, so aloe, here you see upper left is aloe vera. It's actually botanical Aloe barbadensis, even though it's native to Saudi Arabia in the Middle East. It's not native to the Caribbean, where a lot of it is grown. And you see it has yellow flowers. The true aloe vera has yellow flowers. Just keep that in mind as you get familiar with succulent plants. Many aloes you never have to water. Okay. The bottom left is an aloe that's growing in the San Gabriel Conservancy in Irwindale. I know the guy, he has a garden of waterless plants. This one on the bottom left has never been watered, okay? And you can see it flowers brilliantly. And I draw your attention to the bottom right, which is a tree aloe, the giant tree aloe. You think of aloes as little things, but no, they can grow tall. And you do see this quite a bit. You see it at the Getty Center in their cactus garden.
Does and that then also, are they slow? Are they slow to gain height?
They're slow growing, but not like a swallow. I mean, they'll grow a foot a year probably.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
And then there's also a climbing aloe second from the right, just so you know the diversity of this.
That's lovely. We have a watering question on this whole shebang from Peter. And this might be a good time to break for that. He says, in my south-facing front yard with lots of sun, he's planted a mixture of agave, aloe, and numerous other succulents. I'm using a drip irrigation on 2 circuits with 1 gallon emitters. Plants are 3 years old. The agaves are about 6 months old. What would be a good watering schedule for the summer and then into the fall and winter? It's currently on 3 days for 45 minutes. He says, maybe I'm
that's way too much.
Maybe too much. Okay.
I mean, I don't think you have to water them the rest of the summer, to tell you the truth.
Really? Okay, well, just what you said.
I mean, but you know what? I would definitely do a trial. I would cut it back to twice a week and then cut it back to once and see if they see any difference.
Okay, Peter, to cut back on your watering. Don't do it. Yeah. Let's see what happens.
I know there was a famous nurseryman named Gary Hammer who had he only grew like cactus agave and he never watered them. And he did very well. Anyway.
Interesting. So, okay, onward.
So bromeliads there are certain bromeliads that are extremely drought tolerant. The Dickeas here, the one in the middle is cherry coke, and the upper left is a silvery one. They're just gorgeous plants. I mean, I have one in my yard, and they put up these beautiful orange flowers. I planted one about 6 or 7 years ago. I never watered it, not once. Never. I was going to say, if you plant these things towards the, when it gets a little bit cool, I mean, again, you don't want to plant them in cold weather, but,
Yeah.
as the summer winds down and the days are shortening and so on, that's
Uh-huh.
probably a really good time to plant. Then they won't be stressed out and you don't have to worry about the watering at all.
Uh-huh.
The upper right is something called sheep-eating plant because it's in the Andes and sheep. Some people think it's a legend but that the sheep would get too close, would get entwined in the really prickly foliage of this plant, and they would die. They wouldn't be able to climb out of it, and then their carcass would fertilize the plant.
Uh-huh.
So that's kind of the legend behind it. And the bottom right is a fascinating bromeliad. It's called an Argentine ball, and it just have hundreds of baby bromeliads growing in a natural dome. I mean, it's, again, go to the California Cactus Center in Pasadena. That's a story in itself about these 5 women whose father came from Thailand in the early part of the 20th century and bought a piece of property and started raising cacti and succulents. And the daughters run the nursery today. That's a story in and of itself.
I love that. Well,
Yeah.
part of what I love about this conversation and the sedum, this slide just accentuates my point. The variety of color and texture you can bring in by using cacti and succulents.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and this is a really good one because Sedum tulipium, what they call autumn joy, which is going to be blooming soon, right? End of the summer, has a lot of different varieties. If you just stuck with Sedum, you would see this autumn joy, and then the Sedum night embers is part of that group of autumn joy flowering sedums. And a spectacular display all throughout the fall anyway. And then you have something like pork and beans in the middle that has different colored leaves, right? They're orange and they're orange and red and pink and green. And the bottom right is an orange coppertone stonecrop, which is a really vibrant succulent. And then, of course, for shape, you have the donkey tail. If you want to grow something in a hanging basket, that's probably the best succulent. I mean,
I'm seeing these a lot on the living walls that are so trendy in architecture.
Yeah, that trend now where people are planting vertically, and that would definitely come into play. And then last but not least, the Sedum confusum bottom left. It's a gorgeous succulent that it has a really shiny emerald green color to it that's hard to resist.
Lovely. I love this.
These are also edible. A lot of the sedums are edible, just so you know.
Oh, interesting.
The young leaves, yeah. Now Crassula is the jade plant in the middle on the top is the most commonly grown succulent, probably.
Sure. We've seen that.
What people don't know about it though is that when it matures, it's really in the late winter, early spring, it's just covered with flowers. It makes a wonderful hedge. It goes 3 to 4 feet tall, and there's really it's very easy to propagate. Of course, you just break off a piece of this.
And it's very sturdy too. We have some in the neighborhood that looks very substantial in the yard.
Yeah. And this fairy crassula, upper right and then bottom left, is an amazing plant. It's one of the best ground covers. You never have to water it. It has a lot of flowers. It's one of my favorites. You don't see it that much, but it's worth buying. And then upper left, you have campfire crassula, which is also a very colorful succulent and easy to grow.
You see that orange and red seem to be popular. Common themes.
Okay, so here we come to a California native. By the way, there are we were on sedum. There are 26 native California sedums, just so you know. And I don't want to leave that. You don't see them that much. They're probably not as
but they're
really.
native, right? If you're committed to growing California natives,
yeah, you can find a lot of. And this is the most popular California native in terms of succulent. It's called Dudleya on the left, right? There you see it with another plant called Million Bells. Now here's a perfect example of the farina that you don't want to touch, and you don't want to get it wet either. In this case, you can kill the plant. If water settles in the rosette of this plant, it dies. And when you see these plants growing wild, they're often 90 degrees, flush up against a cliff, right? Up on a sandstone cliff. And the reason for that is that if any water, all the water that gets on the plant is going to flow off. Because any water that settles, so you're going to be very careful. That was that question about how to water. You
Yes.
never want water to touch the leaves of this plant. Either put a drip line around it,
Yeah.
or make sure you soak it. You soak it in a manner that the leaves are not touched by the water.
Wow. These plants
Yeah.
are just made for the moment that we are in, aren't they?
Right, they are. They are, because you really, yeah. Now here's Echeveria, and these are also South American. Amazing colors and textures. You know, the bottom left with a ruffled Echeveria. The one in the middle is the chenille plant with a very soft leaves, touchable leaves. And then you just have these amazing shapes, like the Mexican snowball, which refers to a lot of different ones on the upper right, and the Echeveria afterglow on the upper left. Beautiful colors, just beautiful colors. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So now
Yeah.
we can do Yucca, yeah. And no, the Yuccas, I mean, they remind you of agave, but they're not monocarpic, right? They live for many, many, many years. And
And
I
they
like
still
the red
bloom,
Yucca.
and they bloom beautifully. That growing up in
Right.
New Mexico,
They have white flowers. They have white flowers. And then just the rosette of those blue, silvery blue rosettes that you see on these plants are really breathtaking. The spoon yucca lower left is in the Topanga Mall. They did re-landscaping just by the entrances, and it's a plant to remember. Also draw your attention to the red yucca, which it's not a true yucca, but they call it that because of similar growth. It has these red flowers in the spring and summer that are really something to see, and it makes that plant worth growing.
where is that picture of the giant yucca taken?
The
Up
giant
there.
yucca on the right.
Yes.
I'm trying to remember, but I don't remember offhand. That's really a big one. But if you see a yucca in Southern California, 99% of the time it's a giant yucca. You'll see that the very large bases of the stems, right, or the multiple trunks, and it goes up, and then you see the sword-like foliage. They're usually not that tall, but that's generally, and you don't have to do anything to that plant. It just grows.
We have a question from Yolanda Lixon. This is interesting. She says, do all yuccas have thorns? I didn't know that there were any that
No,
had.
actually, it's interesting. See, these are not necessarily, I wouldn't call these thorns. I would call them sharp, sharp foliage as opposed to thorns.
Nothing you want to cuddle up to, though, for sure.
Nothing you want to cuddle up to. Very well put.
Great. Grass trees.
Yeah, grass tree. So we have a Mexican grass tree and an Australian grass tree, different parts of the world, but the same thing, just a very stout trunk. And then you see the foliage coming up off the top. But the trunk is for one purpose, so that's to save water, right? Water. So that the plant always has a steady supply. And it's obviously makes a statement.
Well, speaking of making a statement, and grass trees, which have that soft grass-like appearance, Denise Landon wants to know. She says, we're switching our parkway to drought-tolerant plants. What plants would you recommend?
Okay. Well, parkways present an interesting problem because it's you don't want something growing too tall because then you can't get out of your driveway. And I mean, you can get out, you can't, because I know I've experimented with this. Okay.
Right.
And when you have tall plants in your parkway, it's really, at some point you cut them down because the visibility is not that good. So
right.
I'll tell you what I would recommend in a parkway is a thing we're coming up to, but it's called Calandrinia. It has blue leaves and purple flowers. I'd say magenta flowers. Yes. I would get low-growing succulents that flower. Okay. One of the things you might want to consider is a Thai hybrid crown of thorns. The Thai hybrid crown of thorns. It grows about 4 or 5 feet tall. I don't think that's too tall to block visibility, and it always has color. Okay. Because there's someone in my neighborhood who's done that, and it's really a magnificent thing if you like red. Okay. The other possibility would be the orange copper tone stone crop that we saw. If you just wanted orange, right? Something low growing, and then. But again, we're going to come to this calendrinia, which I think is a tremendous parkway plant because of the flowers, and you can take a look at it there.
One quick question on the grass we were just on. How Robert Wiltz wants to know, how is the trunk shaved on these grass plants?
How's it shaped?
Yeah, how's it shaved?
Oh, it just grows like that on its own. You don't have to do anything.
Oh, there you go, Robert.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
Right. So this is Plumeria, which for all intents and purposes are cacti when it comes to their care. In other words, you really don't have to water them once they've matured, right? The biggest problem with Plumerias is getting them past the first 2 or 3 years so they don't freeze. If you can get them through the first 2 or 3 years, you're probably going to be okay. Okay, if you live in a borderline area, I mean, if you live south of Mulholland Drive, you're probably okay. If you live north of Mulholland Drive, speaking of the Los Angeles area, it's going to be a lot colder. But they don't need any, once they're established, they really don't need any water. And you can see all the different varieties. Don't be afraid of growing Plumeria because of you think it's going to need a lot of water. It doesn't.
Yeah, I always think of tropical when I think of Plumeria, but that's not the case. Yeah, right. Interesting. Oh, Robert Finkelstein wants to know what the best time is to plant your Plumeria.
So I would say now is a good time.
Now's a good time.
Okay. You don't want to plant in the cold weather because then anything tropical, right? Even citrus. Citrus, a lot of people say should be planted in the summer, or mangoes, right? The same principle, because they grow in the warm weather. They don't grow in the cold weather. And if you plant them in the cold weather, you're going to still be concerned about water. And sometimes it doesn't rain in California in the winter, right? So what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And then, so that's a good argument for that.
We've got a couple more questions, but I want to get to the mangave.
Yeah, so this is an amazing thing. This is called mangave or mangave. These are hybrids between agave and manfreda, which is a related genus. And you can see all the incredible designs and colors of these plants. And you want to find out where you can get them through San Marcos growers. San Marcos is a wholesale grower, but they supply a lot of retail growers. So when you reference them, we have their website on the end of this.
On the slide, you'll have that reference, everybody. So
yeah, you'll have that reference.
Yeah. We have a question. Oh, let me have you get to this first. No, go ahead. Go ahead with the next slide if you'd like.
Yeah. So this is good because these are all in the daisy family. Now the ones on the left, you see a lot of, right? The blue chalk sticks. I just wanted to differentiate. The bottom left is the serpent Senecio is probably a better ground cover because the upper right, and actually they're the same color blue. It's just a slide that shows one bluer than the other. The same color blue. But the upper left grows taller and it's more rangy and it's harder to control. But the one on the bottom left, the serpent Senecio, is a much lower growing, tighter growing, I think more decorous ground cover than the one on the top.
Okay, let me get to, we're running out of time, so let me get to these viewer questions. Renee Ruiz says she has a portion of her San Pedro cactus that fell over. She doesn't want to send it to a landfill because it's so beautiful. Do you know a nursery or a resource that would take it? Is there anything
it's a big one.
Yeah.
You know what you do? Well, first of all, there's something called plant brokers, believe it or not.
Brokers.
And these are people that actually drive around looking for what you call specimen trees, like huge palm trees or cacti. And then they knock on your door and they say, we'll give you this much if you allow us to remove the tree. So you might want to do an internet search of tree brokers and find out what the what the interest is in in your cactus, or even call nurseries and ask them, nurseries that grow what they call specimen trees, right? Yes. That supply landscape companies and say, are you interested? Send them a picture. Are you interested in this cactus?
Yeah, great, perfect. And before we run out of time, Lynn Fallon says, do succulents in pots need more or less water? We said we don't need to water them, but what is it?
No, that's a different story. Now, anything in a container, you have to, it's going to need a little water. Now, I shouldn't say anything because again, what you're getting into agaves and some of these container plants,
Yes.
I mean, again, especially if they have a little bit of shade. I mean, I know that I have an agave plant in a pot that's never been watered, but it doesn't get full sun. It gets filtered sun.
Uh-huh.
Okay. But even if it got regular, I don't know. I don't know if you ever need to. It depends. Some are going to need water. I don't want to say by any means. And if you plant a cacti or succulent, you don't have to water. In a container, you will have to water, right? But the larger the container, the less you have to water, right? If it's in a little pot, it's obviously going to need more water than if it's in a big one.
More, but not a lot still, right? Is that what I'm
right,
hearing
right,
from you? Yeah,
right.
great. Okay, we've
I
only
want to make sure we get to this one ground cover to answer the. But yeah, I mean, obviously, you could use any of those blue chalk sticks as ground covers in your parkway.
great.
These aeoniums are native to the Canary Islands and Morocco. They're very distinctive. The one on the left with the black leaves and the yellow flowers. It's an amazing plant. And then the one on the right, the sunburst, is also an amazing. And the one in the middle, for that matter. That's another one you could use for a ground cover. The Aeonium kiwi. It grows low to the ground.
That's great.
These are the mother-in-law tongues or snake plants, but they're actually more diverse than some people think. People think of them as the one on the lower left, but actually there's one in the center that looks like a starfish. Underneath it is a white one, pretty much white. And on the bottom right is one that's cylindrical because it has cylindrical leaves.
Great, perfect.
And all these are good for indoor, by the way. I want to draw your attention. Well, the one on the right is very nice. It's it looks like an agave, but the leaves are soft. And the one on the right, some people consider this the most spectacular succulent plant you can grow. The Fucraea McDougallii. Anyway, because you can see what it looks like I mean, it's something to look at. It's something very inspiring. Yeah.
We have one question that I think is really relevant.
Okay.
Tom McKenna says, with all these plants, what's the best way to handle them, right?
You raise a very good question. With gloves, make sure you're wearing gloves. And, when you knock them out of the container, right, you knock them out with with a shovel. And, any plant you knock out of the container, you sort of turn it over. You knock a little bit here, and you turn and knock a little bit there. But yeah, you have to wear gloves.
Great.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, we're running out of time. What's the last few things that you'd like to get across?
Yeah, so these are just living stones. It's an exotic succulent from South Africa. It looks like stone.
Great.
And let's go. Oh, this is one with the one on the far left. You've probably seen the ponytail palm. It has a big. Some people call it elephant foot because it has a broad base. And there's another picture of a ponytail palm. This is when it's more developed. I just wanted to show it's good in a container. And then when it develops, you see what it looks like.
Great. And last but not least, the ice
plant.
plant.
Yeah, okay, ice plants. Ice plants, like on the bottom right, they can really make a statement. Oh, and a parkway. If you want something for your parkway that really knock people's socks off, you can plant an ice plant. And the bottom left, actually the ones on the bottom right are not as long-lived. But on the bottom left, the rosea ice plant, which you don't see much anymore, that can live for decades. So if you want to put something down, now again, it's not that long blooming. You probably get 6 weeks out of it, but still, it's a worthwhile.
Well, listen, sadly, we are out of time. There's so much more to talk about.
One more. Keep going, because go back, forward. I mean back.
Make
one more.
Wreath. Oh,
back. No, the other direction. Okay. Rock purslane. I recommend that as a ground cover for the lady who said she was looking for a solution. It's right in the middle of the top, and it has pink flowers most of the year. Okay.
Great. Joshua, this is great. We didn't get to so much, but there are wonderful resources that you'll have when you get the slides and our follow-up email. Thank you once again, Joshua. This is always amazing. Joshua's column runs in Saturday's paper and online in all of our publications. His website is thesmartergardener.com. Meanwhile, you can catch up on our virtual programs you missed by going to scng.com/virtual events. And if you'd like to share your thoughts from today, or if you have additional questions, and I know that some of you do, please email us at events.
By the way, we have to thank Julie Corlett for putting together the slides.
Our magic genie behind the scene, Julie Corlett. Thank you so much for your production help with this and with everything. And before we go, let me just say again, if you're not a subscriber, but you want to get in on all of our entertainment and information news, give us a call at 877-469-6133. We're going to be here next month. Keep an ear out for our next show. Once again, thanks, Joshua. Thank you all, and we'll see you next time.
Okay,
Bye.
sounds good.